The moment you walk into a room that costs more than a decent house to rent for a single evening, you notice the smell first. It is not just the scent of imported white orchids cascading from crystal chandeliers, or the aroma of roasted prime rib wafting from the catering kitchen. It is the smell of desperation masked by expensive perfume. I sat alone at a small table near the back of the grand ballroom, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching a million-dollar farce unfold in real time. My brother, Jason, stood at the center of the dance floor. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian tuxedo that probably cost more than my first car. He was laughing loudly, holding a glass of vintage champagne, soaking in the admiration of the 200 guests who had gathered to celebrate his so-called success. Beside him stood Nicole. She wore an ivory silk gown laced with genuine pearls, her hair perfectly styled, smiling like she had just won the lottery. She was beautiful. I could admit that. But looking at her now, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no heartbreak, just the cold, sterile observation of a forensic accountant looking at a highly irregular liability. For months ago, Nicole was my fiancée. Now she was my brother's bride. And this entire spectacle, this absurd display of wealth in the most exclusive country club in Ohio, was funded by a massive, hollow lie. I took another sip of my water. The string quartet in the corner transitioned into a smooth, classical rendition of a modern pop song. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided past my table, carrying trays of caviar and gold leaf desserts. Everywhere I looked, I saw people trying too hard. I saw minor local politicians, real estate brokers, and wealthy retirees who had been invited not because they were family friends, but because they were Mark's. They were Jason's investors. At the head table, my parents were positively glowing. My father, Robert, looked 10 years younger, his chest puffed out with pride as he conversed with a local judge. My mother, Patricia, was in her element. She was draped in jewelry, floating from table to table, making sure everyone knew that the man of the hour was her youngest son, the golden boy, the one who had finally made it big. They did not seem to care that their oldest son was sitting in the shadows, watching the woman he loved marry his own brother. In their eyes, I was just the background noise. I was the reliable, boring, unglamorous older brother who simply needed to get over it for the sake of the family image. I checked my watch. It was a cheap, functional piece. It read 7:28 in the evening. I had set the automated email trigger for exactly 7:30. I had 2 minutes left before reality crashed through the stained glass windows of this country club. Jason threw his head back and laughed at a joke someone made. Nicole kissed his cheek. They looked like the perfect cover of a bridal magazine. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene. I just watched them with the quiet patience of a man who knows exactly how the math works out. Numbers do not lie. People do. And Jason had been lying his entire life. I crossed one leg over the other, resting my hands on my lap. 1 minute and 30 seconds. A sharp tapping sound echoed through the ballroom, cutting over the soft music and the hum of conversation. My mother was standing at the head table, delicately striking her champagne flute with a silver spoon. She waited with a practiced, elegant smile until every face in the room turned toward her. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving a single spotlight shining directly on her, Jason, and Nicole. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," Patricia began, her voice amplified by a sleek microphone. "I want to say a few words about my son." She paused, letting the silence build. I leaned back in my chair. Here it comes, I thought. The ultimate rewriting of history. "Raising boys is never easy," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "You worry about them. You hope they find their way in the world. As a mother, you watch them grow and you see their true natures emerge. Now, my oldest son, David." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the room, not even looking directly at me. A few guests turned their heads, offering me polite, pitying smiles. "David has always been the practical one, the steady one, the one who plays it safe and keeps his feet firmly on the ground." She let that hang in the air for a second. The implication was clear. Safe meant boring. Steady meant unremarkable. But Jason, she continued, turning her radiant gaze back to the groom. Jason has always been our shooting star. From the time he was a little boy, he never settled for ordinary. He wanted the best out of life. He takes risks. He dreams big. Some people. She paused again, and this time she did look at me. Her eyes were hard, flashing with a warning to stay in my lane. Some people might say he moves too fast. Some might not understand his drive, or the choices he makes to achieve his happiness. She was talking about Nicole. She was justifying the betrayal right in front of 200 people, dressing it up as ambition and destiny. But look around you. Patricia swept her arm toward the crystal chandeliers, the lavish floral arrangements, the sheer opulence of the room. Look at what that ambition has built. Jason saw what he wanted and he took it, because that is what winners do. She raised her glass high. To Jason and Nicole. He always wins. The room erupted into applause. People laughed. A deep, rumbling sound of approval from the wealthy crowd. They raised their glasses, shouting their congratulations. I saw Nicole blush, burying her face into Jason's shoulder. Jason looked directly at me over the rim of his glass, a smirk playing on his lips. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He thought he had beaten me. He thought he had taken my future, humiliated me in front of our entire community, and gotten away with it. I did not break eye contact. I did not frown. I simply stared back at him, my face a blank mask. I let him have his moment of absolute superiority, because I knew something he did not. I glanced down at my watch one last time. 7:29 and 55 seconds. 56. 57. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. 58. 59. 7:30. I looked back up at Jason. It started with a single, sharp chirp. Jason reached into his tuxedo jacket, looking slightly annoyed that his moment of glory was being interrupted. He pulled out his phone. Then, a second sound. A soft ding from a table near the front. Then another. And another. Within 5 seconds, a cascade of notification sounds began erupting across the ballroom. Chimes, buzzes, custom ringtones. It sounded like a flock of electronic birds waking up all at once. The applause died down, replaced by a wave of confusion. Men in expensive suits reached into their pockets. Women dug through their designer clutches. I watched Jason. I watched him unlock his screen. I watched his eyes scan the first line of the email. I had titled it simply, Notice of Fraudulent Activity and Imminent Federal Asset Seizure. Attached to that email were 40 pages of forensic accounting data, bank routing numbers, copies of wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, evidence of shell companies created in Delaware with no physical addresses, and most importantly, a detailed breakdown of how new investor money was being used directly to pay off older investors and to fund this exact $1 million wedding. A classic Ponzi scheme, documented with undeniable mathematical precision. The smirk on Jason's face did not just fade. It evaporated. In real time, I saw the blood physically drain from his cheeks. His tan skin turned a sickly, ash gray. His hands began to tremble so violently that he nearly dropped the device. Nicole touched his arm, leaning in close. "Babe, what is it?" she whispered, her voice carrying through the sudden, heavy silence of the room. Jason could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. At the table next to him, Arthur, a retired corporate lawyer and one of Jason's biggest investors, stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the marble floor. Arthur stared at his own phone, his face twisted in pure rage. He looked from the screen to Jason. My father, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, stepped down from the head table and hurried over to Jason. "Son, what is going on? Why is everyone?" Robert grabbed the phone out of Jason's shaking hands. My father was not a financial expert, but he was not stupid either. The summary page on the screen was designed to be understood by anyone. It clearly listed his own name, Robert, next to a depleted 401k retirement account, alongside a forged signature authorizing a second mortgage on his home. I counted the seconds in my head. 1. My father's eyes widened in confusion as he read the first few lines. 2. The confusion morphed into horrific understanding as he saw the numbers. 3. The realization hit him that he was completely, utterly bankrupt. On the fourth second, Robert dropped the phone. His hands flew to his chest, clutching the fabric of his suit jacket. A terrible, wheezing gasp escaped his throat. His knees buckled, folding underneath him like cheap cardboard. He hit the floor with a heavy, sickening thud, right next to the 4-tier wedding cake. Someone screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the remaining silence. Call an ambulance. Somebody call 911. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Guests shoved past each other. Waiters dropped trays of champagne, the glasses shattering into 1,000 pieces across the dance floor. Nicole was backing away from Jason, looking at him with wide, terrified eyes. Jason just stood there, frozen, staring at our father gasping for air on the ground. I remained in my chair at the back of the room. I took one final sip of my sparkling water, placed the glass neatly on the table, and stood up. I did not rush toward the crowd. I turned around and began walking calmly toward the exit. To understand how a family reaches the point where a son calmly watches his father collapse at a wedding, you have to look at the architecture of the family itself. Families do not break overnight. They erode year after year through 1,000 tiny decisions. In my family, the roles were assigned early, and they were non-negotiable. I was the scapegoat. Jason was the golden child. It was a dynamic so deeply ingrained in our household that it felt like gravity. When I got an A- on a math test in high school, my father sat me down and gave me a long lecture about work ethic and missed potential. When Jason failed biology twice, my mother blamed the public school system, claimed the teacher had a personal vendetta against him, and bought him a new video game console to make him feel better. I learned very quickly that my value in the family was based entirely on my utility. I was loved conditionally. I was loved when I was fixing the lawnmower, or tutoring Jason so he would not get held back a grade, or keeping quiet so my parents could focus on Jason's emotional outbursts. The defining moment happened when I was 21. I was in my third year of college studying accounting. I had worked 2 part-time jobs since I was 16 to save up for my tuition, keeping the money in a joint account my parents had set up for me when I was a kid. Jason was 19. He had just gotten his driver's license after failing the test 3 times. One rainy Friday night, despite my parents explicitly telling him not to take the car out, he took my father's sedan to a party. He got drunk, drove home, and wrapped the car around a telephone pole. By some miracle, he walked away with only a few bruises. But the car was totaled, and he had destroyed a section of city property. I remember coming home from the library the next day. The house was tense, filled with my mother's dramatic sobbing. I walked into the kitchen, expecting to see Jason grounded for life. Instead, he was sitting at the table, eating a sandwich, looking completely unbothered. My father called me into the living room. He looked tired. He sat me down and put a hand on my shoulder. "David, we have a situation," he said. "Jason made a mistake. A big one. The insurance is not going to cover all the damages because he was under the influence. And if we do not pay the city for the pole, they are going to press charges." I nodded, feeling bad for my parents. "What are you going to do?" I asked. My father looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "We already did it. We had to transfer the money out of your college fund this morning to cover the immediate legal fees and the city fines." I stared at him. The room felt like it was spinning. My tuition money? The money I saved for 5 years. "David, please," my mother called out from the kitchen, her voice trembling with manufactured victimhood. "Do not make this harder than it is. Your brother is traumatized. He could have died. You are smart, you can just take out student loans. Jason needs us right now. He is too fragile to handle a criminal record." I looked from my mother in the doorway to my father, who was staring at the floor. That was the exact moment I realized the truth. My hard work, my future, my security meant absolutely nothing compared to Jason's comfort. I was not a son. I was a financial shock absorber. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I just walked out of the house, went to the bank, and opened a new private account. I took out the loans. I graduated at the top of my class. And I built a wall around my emotions so high and so thick that my family could never weaponize my feelings against me again. 10 years passed. I became a forensic accountant. I specialized in tearing apart corporate financial records, looking for the hidden lies within the numbers. I liked the work because numbers do not manipulate you. They do not cry and claim they had a hard childhood when you catch them not adding up. They just are what they are. I lived a quiet, structured life. And then I met Nicole. We met at a coffee shop near my firm. She was a marketing consultant, sharp, funny, and incredibly driven. What drew me to her initially was how grounded she seemed. We shared the same values, or so I thought. We talked about building a solid foundation, buying a modest house in the suburbs, investing wisely for the future. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found a partner. Someone who did not view me as a resource to be exploited. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. She said yes, and for a brief, foolish period I was genuinely happy. Then I introduced her to my family. Jason had reinvented himself. After years of bouncing between failed jobs and relying on my parents for rent money, he suddenly emerged as a real estate entrepreneur. He started a company called Apex Development Group. Practically overnight, he was driving a leased Porsche, wearing flashy designer clothes, and throwing around business buzzwords he barely understood. The first time Nicole met Jason was at a family dinner at my parents' house. Jason spent the entire evening dominating the conversation. He talked about his upcoming multi-million-dollar projects, his trips to Miami, his vision for the future of urban development. My parents hung on his every word, beaming with pride. I noticed the shift in Nicole almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. She started asking me why I did not take more risks with my career, why I was content just auditing other people's money instead of making my own. "Jason has so much ambition, David," she said to me one night on the drive home. "He really goes after what he wants. You have to respect that." Over the next few months, Jason began inserting himself into our lives. He would invite Nicole out to lunch to discuss marketing strategies for his company. He started buying her expensive, unnecessary gifts. A designer handbag for her birthday, a pair of diamond earrings just because. I told him to back off. He just laughed it off, playing the generous future brother-in-law. But I am an auditor. I noticed patterns. I noticed how Nicole started dressing differently, mirroring the flashy aesthetic Jason projected. I noticed how she complained about my practical sedan and hinted that we should upgrade to a luxury SUV. What Nicole was experiencing was classic cognitive dissonance. She had committed to me the safe, reliable choice, but she was deeply, fundamentally intoxicated by the illusion of immense wealth and excitement that Jason was dangling in front of her. Instead of admitting she was greedy, she convinced herself that Jason was simply a better, more visionary man. She rationalized her shifting affections by telling herself that she deserved the lifestyle Jason was promising. I saw it happening. I tried to talk to her about it. I tried to explain that real wealth is quiet, that Jason's lifestyle looked like a house of cards. But she just accused me of being jealous. "You always resent him because your parents favor him," she snapped during one of our final arguments. "You just cannot stand to see him succeed." She was wrong. I did not resent his success. I suspected it was entirely fake. But I never imagined just how far both of them were willing to go to prove me wrong. There are moments in life that divide your timeline into a definitive before and after. For me, that moment happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 months before our scheduled wedding. I was supposed to be in Chicago for a 3-day audit of a manufacturing firm. But the client had failed to provide the necessary ledgers, forcing a postponement. I caught an early flight back to Ohio, exhausted and irritated. All I wanted was to go home, take a shower, and sleep in my own bed. I parked my car in the underground garage of the apartment complex Nicole and I shared. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed things were unusually quiet. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The first thing I saw was a pair of men's leather shoes kicked off haphazardly in the entryway. They were Italian leather. Expensive. They were Jason's. My forensic brain instantly processed the data. Jason's shoes. Tuesday afternoon. Nicole had called in sick to work that morning, claiming a migraine. I did not call out their names. The silence in the apartment was heavy, suffocating. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear the faint sound of heavy breathing, the rustle of sheets. I pushed the door open. They were in my bed, my brother and my fiancé. For a split second, time completely stopped. I did not feel rage. I did not feel sorrow. I felt a cold, clinical detachment wash over my entire nervous system. It was a defense mechanism honed over decades of dealing with my family, finally activating at full power. Nicole saw me first. She gasped, scrambling backward against the headboard, pulling the duvet up to cover her chest. Her eyes were wide with panic. "David, it is not what you think," she stammered, delivering the most cliché, pathetic line in human history. Jason sat up slowly. He did not look panicked. He looked slightly inconvenienced. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed, as if my arriving early was a scheduling error on my part. I did not say a word. I looked down at the floor near the nightstand. When Jason had hastily taken off his pants, he had knocked over a small wooden valet tray on my bedside table. My grandfather's pocket watch, the only heirloom I cared about, given to me by the only man in my family who understood the value of hard work, had fallen onto the hardwood floor. Jason had stepped on it in his rush to get into my bed. The silver casing was dented. The glass face was completely shattered, the delicate hands bent and broken beneath the heavy heel of his shoe. I stared at the broken watch for a long time. It was a perfect, physical manifestation of everything my family had ever done to me. They took what was mine, they broke it carelessly, and they expected me to clean up the glass. I felt a fundamental shift inside my chest. It was the sensation of a heavy, rusted chain finally snapping. The part of me that still cared, the part of me that still wanted to be a good son and a loyal brother, died right there on that bedroom floor. I looked up at Jason. He was waiting for me to yell, to throw a punch, to give him a reaction he could use against me later. I turned around, walked into the living room, and grabbed my suitcase that was still packed from the trip. I walked out the front door and let it click shut behind me. I did not look back. 2 days later, my mother called a family meeting at their house. I almost did not go. I had moved into an extended stay hotel and had already contacted my landlord to break the lease on the apartment. But a morbid curiosity drove me to drive out to the suburbs. I wanted to see exactly how they would justify this. I wanted to hear the exact words they would use to protect the golden boy. When I walked into the living room, the scene was set perfectly for a tragedy, but with the wrong victim. Jason was sitting on the sofa, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, staring mournfully at his hands. My mother was sitting next to him, gently rubbing his back as if he had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. My father was pacing near the fireplace, looking deeply uncomfortable. Nobody looked at me when I sat down in the armchair across from them. "David, thank you for coming." My father started, his voice strained. "We know you are hurt. This is a very complicated situation." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice flat, completely devoid of emotion. "My brother sleeping with my fiancée in my bed is complicated." Jason looked up, deploying his best weapon, vulnerability. "David, I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking perfectly. "It was not planned. We were just spending time together, talking about her marketing business, and we realized we had this this intense connection. We tried to fight it. We really did. We did not want to betray you, but we cannot control who we fall in love with. It was a masterclass in Darvo. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. He was not a predator who stole from his brother. He was a tragic romantic hero overwhelmed by destiny. My mother chimed in immediately. Jason is right, David. Matters of the heart are messy. And if we are being completely honest. She hesitated, bracing herself to deliver the killing blow. Nicole felt that you were always working. You are so focused on your audits and your numbers. You neglected her emotional needs. Jason just stepped in to be a friend when she was lonely. You cannot entirely blame them. I sat perfectly still. I did not blink. I let the absolute insanity of her words hang in the silent room. My mother had just blamed me for being cheated on, because I worked too hard to build a life for the woman who betrayed me. So, it is my fault, I said. It was not a question. No one is saying it is your fault, son. My father interjected weakly. We just need to handle this as a family, without anger. Jason and Nicole are going to stay together. They want to get married. And we want you to find it in your heart to forgive them. We cannot have this tear the family apart. People in town would talk. There it was, the ultimate truth. They did not care about my pain. They cared about the optics. They wanted me to swallow my humiliation quietly so they could continue playing the perfect suburban family at church on Sundays. I stood up slowly. I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt. There is nothing complicated about this, I said, my voice as cold as ice. Jason took what was mine because he is a thief, and you are defending him because you are cowards. David, how dare you speak to us like that? My mother shrieked, her hand flying to her chest. I am moving my things out of the apartment tomorrow, I continued, ignoring her entirely. Do not contact me. Do not invite me to the wedding. From this moment forward, I do not have a brother. And I do not have parents. I walked out of the house. I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I would just cut them off and move on. But I was wrong. The universe, it seemed, was not quite finished with Jason. And neither was I. 6 weeks passed. The invitations for the wedding were sent out. I received one in the mail, forwarded to my new apartment. My mother had actually handwritten a note on the back. Please be the bigger person. Family is everything. I shredded it and threw it in the trash. I threw myself entirely into my work. I was auditing a medium-sized logistics company, tearing through their expense reports with a brutal efficiency that terrified their CFO. I was operating like a machine, using the numbers to block out the noise of my personal life. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I had a meeting with Arthur. Arthur was a 72-year-old retired corporate attorney. He was sharp, wealthy, and ruthless in his prime. Now, he managed his own substantial investment portfolio and occasionally hired my firm to do due diligence on private equity deals he was considering. He was a client, but over the years we had developed a mutual respect based on a shared lack of tolerance for nonsense. He sat across from my desk in his tailored tweed suit, leaning on his cane. "David, you look like hell," Arthur said, taking a sip of the black coffee my assistant had brought in. "You are working too many hours. You need to take a vacation. Go to Cabo. Drink something with an umbrella in it." "I'm fine, Arthur. What do you have for me today?" I asked, opening my notepad. Arthur pulled a glossy, heavy stock brochure out of his leather briefcase and tossed it onto my desk. "I need you to look into this outfit. They have been aggressively courting guys at my country club, pitching a massive commercial real estate development on the east side of town. High returns, guaranteed dividends. The usual song and dance." I looked down at the brochure. Bold, gold lettering stamped across a picture of a sleek, modern architectural rendering. Apex Development Group. Visionary real estate for a modern world. Below it, the name of the CEO, Jason Robert. My brother had dropped our last name for his business, using his middle name instead to sound more established. I stared at the brochure. My heart rate did not increase. My hands did not shake. Instead, my mind went perfectly, terrifyingly quiet. The forensic accountant inside me woke up, stretched, and looked at the target. "Arthur," I said slowly, tracing the edge of the brochure with my pen. "What exactly are they promising?" 20% annual returns, Arthur snorted, claiming they have municipal tax incentives locked down, zoning approved, the works. The kid running it, Jason, he is slick. Dresses well, talks a big game. He already got 2 guys at the club to write checks for $100,000 each. But 20% guaranteed? In this market? It smells like a slaughterhouse in July. David, I want you to find the rot. You want a full audit? I asked. I want you to turn this company inside out, Arthur said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the predatory instinct of an old shark. If it is legitimate, I will invest. If it is a scam, I want to know exactly how it works before I warn the board at the club. I closed the brochure and slid it into my top drawer. I will need access to whatever prospectus they gave you, and I need you to authorize me to run a deep background check on their corporate filings. Done, Arthur said, standing up. How long will it take? Give me a week, I replied. After Arthur left, I locked the door to my office. I pulled the brochure back out and laid it flat on my desk. I looked at Jason's smiling face on the back page. He looked so confident, so untouchable. Let's see what you are really building, little brother, I whispered to the empty room. I opened my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and logged into the state's corporate registry database. For the next 5 nights, I barely slept. I lived on black coffee, cold takeout, and the pure, unadulterated thrill of the hunt. When you investigate financial fraud, you are not looking for a smoking gun right away. You are looking for a loose thread. Once you find it, you just keep pulling until the entire sweater unravels. I started with the state filings. Jason had registered Apex Development Group as an LLC 2 years ago. That part was legal. But then I looked at the listed business address. I ran it through satellite imagery and property records. It was not a corporate office building. It was a mail drop box at a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. Strike 1. Next, I subpoenaed the public records for the Municipal Zoning Board. According to Arthur's prospectus, Jason claimed to have zoning approval for a 50-acre commercial complex on the east side of the city. I pulled every zoning application for that district over the last 5 years. There was no application from Apex Development. Not pending. Not rejected. It simply did not exist. Strike 2. But the real magic happened when I started tracing the money. Arthur had provided me with the routing information for the escrow account Jason was using to collect investor funds. Through legal investigative channels available to my firm, I began tracking the outgoing wire transfers from that account. In a legitimate real estate development, money flows from the escrow account to architects, construction firms, land surveyors, and material suppliers. Jason's money did not go to any of those places. It went into a web of shell companies. I spent 3 nights mapping it out on a massive whiteboard in my home office. Apex Development transferred funds to a company called Blue Sky Holdings. Blue Sky Holdings then wired money to Summit Consulting LLC. Summit Consulting then paid out massive management fees to Jason's personal accounts. It was a classic layering technique designed to obfuscate the origin of the funds. But I could see right through it. I audited his personal spending patterns based on the public tax liens I found. The leased Porsche, the designer clothes, the $30,000 engagement ring for Nicole, the deposits for the $1 million wedding venue at the country club. Every single dime of his luxury lifestyle was being funded directly by the initial capital provided by investors like the men at Arthur's Club. Jason was not building a real estate empire. He was running a Ponzi scheme. He was bringing in new money to pay off the interest of the early investors to keep them quiet, while siphoning the majority of the principal to fund his own life. It was arrogant, it was sloppy, and it was highly federally illegal. I stood back and looked at the whiteboard. It was a masterpiece of financial ruin. The numbers painted a picture of a man who was so desperate to maintain the illusion of success that he was willing to commit massive felonies to keep the lights on. I felt a dark, satisfying calm settle in my stomach. The anger over Nicole cheating on me faded away entirely. It was replaced by something much colder and much more dangerous. I was no longer a betrayed fiancé. I was the executioner. But there was one piece of the puzzle missing. To run a Ponzi scheme this large, Jason needed initial seed money to create the illusion of early momentum before he could target the big fish at the country club. Where did he get his first massive injection of cash? I sat down at my laptop and started digging into the earliest transactions associated with Blue Sky Holdings. I scrolled through pages of digital bank records from 18 months ago. And then I found it. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing the lines of a scanned, notarized document. It was the loose thread that would destroy my entire family. The document on my screen was a home equity line of credit, commonly known as a HELOC. It was authorized for $300,000. The collateral for the loan was a 3-bedroom ranch house in the suburbs. The exact house I grew up in. My parents' house. I downloaded the PDF and zoomed in on the final page. There were 3 signatures at the bottom. One belonged to Jason, listed as a guarantor. The other 2 belonged to Robert and Patricia. I know my parents' handwriting. I have seen my father's cramped, left-handed scrawl on thousands of birthday cards and checks. I know the elegant, swooping loops of my mother's signature. The signatures on this legal banking document were flawless forgeries. My forensic accountant brain immediately broke down the timeline. 18 months ago, Jason needed cash to start his fake company. The banks would not lend to him because he had no collateral and terrible credit. So, he took out a massive loan against the only asset our family had, the fully paid-off house my parents had worked 32 years to own. He had forged their signatures, used a shady notary public likely bribed to look the other way, and secured the $300,000. But it got worse. I cross-referenced the dates with my father's retirement accounts. 2 weeks after the house was mortgaged, a transfer of $250,000 was initiated from my father's 401k account into Jason's primary shell company, Blue Sky Holdings. It was marked as an early withdrawal private investment. Jason had not just mortgaged their home. He had liquidated their entire life savings. He had stolen over $500,000 from the people who had spent their entire lives protecting him. And the most pathetic part? I knew with absolute certainty that my parents had no idea. They were financially illiterate. My father still balanced his checkbook with a pencil. Jason likely intercepted the bank statements in the mail or set up fake online portals to show them fabricated balances. They were currently walking around the country club, bragging to their friends about their successful son, completely unaware that they were destitute. If the housing market dipped or if Jason missed a payment on the fraudulent loan, the bank would foreclose on the house, and they would be on the street. I sat in the dark glow of my monitors. I thought about calling them. I thought about driving over to their house, throwing the documents on the kitchen table, and forcing them to confront the monster they had created. But I remembered the family meeting. I remembered my mother telling me that Jason was a shooting star. I remembered my father asking me to swallow my pride to protect the family image. They wanted the illusion. They had sacrificed me for it. I reached for my coffee mug. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. I was not going to tell them. I was going to let them enjoy the wedding. I was going to let them put on their expensive clothes, drink their expensive champagne, and stand in front of the entire town at the absolute peak of their fake, glittering mountain. And then I was going to push them off the edge. I opened a new, encrypted folder on my desktop. I named it Federal Submission. I began dragging every forged signature, every wire transfer, every piece of evidence of tax evasion and wire fraud into the folder. I was not just going to expose Jason to his investors. I was going to hand him over to the Internal Revenue Service and the FBI on a silver platter. I started drafting the summary report. It was going to be the finest piece of accounting I had ever done. When you look at financial records long enough, they start to tell a story. The story Jason's numbers told was one of extreme arrogance. He had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from our parents and his investors, but that money could not just sit in a domestic bank account. Large cash deposits and sudden influxes of wealth trigger automated flags with the government. Jason knew just enough about finance to know he needed to hide the money, but he was too stupid to realize that in the digital age, every transaction leaves a permanent, glowing footprint if you know where to look. I spent my entire Saturday digging into the outgoing wire transfers from his primary shell company, Blue Sky Holdings. I noticed a recurring outbound payment. On the 15th of every month, exactly $30,000 was wired to a corporate entity called Apex Global Strategies. The name sounded legitimate, but the receiving bank did not. The routing number belonged to a financial institution located in Georgetown, in the Cayman Islands. I leaned back in my desk chair and let out a long, slow breath. The game had just changed. Up until this point, Jason was committing local fraud. Stealing from our parents was terrible, and defrauding the men at the country club was a state-level crime. But the moment you route illicit funds across international borders to evade taxation and hide the origin of the money, you cross an invisible, heavily guarded line. You enter the territory of wire fraud and international tax evasion. I pulled up the federal statutes on my secondary monitor. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. Wire fraud. Each separate electronic transfer across state or international lines constitutes a separate offense, carrying a maximum penalty of 20 years in federal prison. Jason had made at least 12 of these transfers. He was not just going to get a slap on the wrist. He had built himself a cage out of his own greed. I tracked the Cayman Islands entity. It was managed by a registered agent, a law firm known for setting up blind trusts for people who do not want to pay taxes. Jason was siphoning the stolen money into an offshore account, likely planning to slowly integrate it back into his legitimate-appearing assets later, or perhaps keeping it as a getaway fund if the Ponzi scheme ever collapsed. The sheer audacity of it made me laugh in the empty, dark room of my home office. My brother, the golden child, the boy who could not pass high school biology without me doing his homework, actually thought he was smart enough to outwit the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He thought putting on a custom Italian suit and throwing around real estate jargon made him invincible. He had no idea what kind of fire he was playing with. The federal government does not care about your charming smile. They do not care if your mother thinks you are a shooting star. When they come for you, they do not argue. They just take everything. I took a screenshot of the offshore routing data and added it to the master file. I had him completely, utterly, and mathematically cornered. There was no defense attorney on earth who could argue away this paper trail. The financial ecosystem Jason had built was a ticking time bomb, and I had just located the detonator. The hardest part of any audit is the synthesis. You have to take a mountain of complex, chaotic data and distill it into a narrative so simple and devastating that a jury, or in this case, a federal investigator, can understand it in 5 minutes. I spent the next 3 days drafting the report. I did not use my firm's letterhead. I operated entirely as an anonymous whistleblower. The final document was 42 pages long. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. I divided it into 3 sections. Section 1 detailed the domestic Ponzi scheme, listing the names of the investors from the country club, the amounts they deposited, and the dates those funds were immediately redirected to pay for Jason's luxury car leases and wedding deposits. Section 2 outlined the mortgage fraud, attaching the forged signatures and the unauthorized transfer of my father's retirement funds. Section 3 was the kill shot, the offshore accounts, the tax evasion, and the wire fraud. I burned the entire dossier onto an encrypted digital drive. But I did not stop there. I knew that sending an anonymous tip to a government agency can sometimes take weeks or months to process. I needed to ensure immediate, explosive action. So, I printed 3 hard copies of the report and placed them into heavy, black leather binders. Then, I went online and set up a secure, untraceable email server. I drafted a message addressed to the lead investigator of the local Federal Bureau of Investigation field office and copied the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The subject line was simple: Massive ongoing Ponzi scheme and imminent flight risk. Apex Development Group. In the body of the email, I provided a brief summary of the crimes and attached the digital dossier. I also added one crucial piece of psychological leverage. I stated that the perpetrator, Jason Robert, was currently sitting on over $2 million in stolen funds, had access to offshore accounts, and was hosting a lavish event that very weekend where he might attempt to secure more fraudulent investments before fleeing the jurisdiction. Nothing motivates a federal agent faster than the phrase, imminent flight risk. I attached the email to an automated scheduling program. I set the delivery time for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, exactly 48 hours before the wedding. I knew the wheels of federal justice could move incredibly fast when presented with undeniable, structured evidence of a multi-million-dollar fraud. But I also wanted the investors to know. I wanted the people who had looked down on me, the people who had enabled Jason's arrogance, to see exactly who they were dealing with. I compiled a mailing list of every investor Jason had scammed, including Arthur and the men from the country club. I drafted a separate, simplified email for them, attaching the evidence of their stolen money. I set the timer for this email to send at exactly 7:30 in the evening on the night of the wedding. I sat back and looked at the screen. The timers were ticking down. There was no going back. I closed the laptop, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. For the first time since I found Jason and Nicole in my bed, my chest felt completely clear. The machine was in motion. We returned to the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers cast a glittering, fractured light over a scene of absolute devastation. The third second had passed. My father was on the marble floor, gasping for air, clutching his chest. My mother, Patricia, dropped her microphone. It hit the floor with a loud, electronic screech that made several guests cover their ears. She fell to her knees beside my father, screaming his name, her carefully styled hair coming undone as she frantically loosened his tie. Robert, look at me. Somebody help him, she wailed, her voice echoing through the massive room. Two waiters sprinted forward, one of them pulling out a phone to dial emergency services. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely. The silence of the music was replaced by the chaotic murmur of 200 panicked guests. But the true center of the disaster was not the medical emergency on the floor. It was the groom. Jason was backed against the head table. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving his fake tan looking like dirty yellow paint on a corpse. He was staring at the screen of his phone, his eyes wide and unblinking. The email I had timed for 7:30 had landed perfectly in his inbox, just as it had landed in the inboxes of Arthur and the other investors. Arthur, the retired corporate lawyer, did not rush to help my father. He ignored the medical crisis completely. He walked slowly, deliberately toward Jason. Arthur's face was dark purple with rage. He held his own phone out, the screen displaying the exact routing numbers showing his $100,000 investment being used to pay for the white orchids hanging above their heads. "You son of a bitch," Arthur growled. His voice was low, but it cut through the noise of the crowd like a serrated knife. "You stole from me. You stole from my firm." "Arthur, wait. I can explain," Jason stammered, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. His voice was thin, high-pitched. The confident, booming voice of the visionary entrepreneur was entirely gone. "It is a misunderstanding. The funds are they are tied up in escrow. The email is a hack. It is a lie. It has the exact routing number of my private trust. You idiot," Arthur spat, taking another step forward. Several other men in expensive suits, the other investors, began to circle the head table. They looked like wolves surrounding a wounded deer. Nicole was standing a few feet away from Jason. She was holding the skirt of her $1 million dress, looking back and forth between Jason and the angry crowd of investors. Her cognitive dissonance was shattering in real time. The illusion of wealth was burning down around her, leaving only the ugly, terrifying reality of what she had married into. "Jason, what is happening?" she cried out, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I did nothing," Jason yelled back, panicking. He looked around wildly, like a trapped animal looking for an exit. But there were too many people. The investors were closing in, demanding answers, demanding their money. I stood by the exit doors, watching the masterpiece unfold. The paramedics burst through the side entrance, rolling a stretcher toward my father. The room was a hurricane of screaming, crying, and threats of violence. And right in the middle of it, the golden boy was finally being crushed by the weight of his own lies. When a narcissist is backed into a corner with absolutely no way out, they do not confess. They do not apologize. They attack. It is a survival instinct hardwired into their psychology. They will burn the entire world down if it means they can play the victim for 5 more minutes. As the paramedics lifted my father onto the stretcher and secured an oxygen mask over his face, Jason's panicked eyes scanned the ballroom. He was looking for a lifeline. He was looking for someone to blame. And then he saw me. I was standing near the back, my hands relaxed in my pockets, my expression completely neutral. I was the only person in the room who was not panicking, crying, or shouting. Jason extended a shaking finger toward me. It was him, Jason screamed. His voice cracked, echoing over the chaos. David did this. He hacked my accounts. He forged those documents to frame me. The room went entirely silent for a fraction of a second. Even the paramedics paused. 200 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Jason seized the moment, leaning into his performance with the desperation of a drowning man. He rushed forward a few steps, tears streaming down his face. He is an accountant. He knows how to manipulate numbers. He has been jealous of me his entire life. He is furious because Nicole left him for me. So he created this entire fake email to ruin my wedding. He is trying to destroy our family. It was the ultimate Darvo defense. Deny the fraud, attack the whistleblower, and reverse the roles of victim and offender. He was actually trying to convince a room full of millionaires that a licensed forensic accountant had committed massive federal cybercrimes just to ruin a wedding reception. My mother, who had been sobbing next to the stretcher, suddenly snapped her head up. The grief on her face twisted instantly into vicious, familiar anger. The programming kicked in. The golden boy was threatened. The scapegoat must be sacrificed. She stood up, her expensive gown stained with champagne and dirt from the floor. She pointed at me, her face contorted with rage. "You monster!" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "You could not stand to see your brother happy. You could not stand that he won. You caused your father to have a heart attack. You did this, David. You are a cold, heartless sociopath." Nicole joined in, desperate to believe the lie so she would not have to face the reality of her own terrible choices. "David, how could you do this?" she cried out, clutching Jason's arm. "This is sick. You are obsessed with ruining us." The crowd of investors looked back and forth between Jason's tearful, desperate face and my calm, unmoving posture. Some of them looked confused. A few of the older country club members, who knew my parents' reputation as upstanding citizens, actually started to glare at me. Jason looked at me, a tiny, triumphant gleam in his tear-filled eyes. He thought it had worked. He thought he had successfully shifted the narrative, just like he did when he wrecked the car, just like he did when he stole my fiancée. He thought the family shield would protect him one last time. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my character. I just reached into my leather briefcase resting on the chair next to me. I unlatched the briefcase. The sharp click of the metal locks sounded incredibly loud in the tense, quiet ballroom. I pulled out one of the heavy, black leather binders. I did not run toward the crowd. I walked at a slow, measured pace, the steady rhythm of a man who has already won the war. The crowd parted for me instinctively, stepping back as if I were carrying a loaded weapon. In a way, I walked straight past my mother, ignoring her completely. I did not look at my father being wheeled out on the stretcher. I walked directly to Arthur. I handed him the binder. "What is this?" Arthur demanded, eyeing the thick spine. "That is reality, Arthur. I said, my voice calm, projecting just enough for the surrounding investors to hear. I do not deal in jealousy. I deal in audits. I am a licensed forensic accountant, and you hired my firm to look into Apex Development Group. That binder contains the truth. Arthur ripped the binder open. Turn to tab 4, I instructed, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Page 12. Arthur flipped the heavy pages. His eyes rapidly scanned the spreadsheet. That is a verified wire transfer from your escrow account, I said, spelling it out so everyone could hear. You deposited $100,000 on the 3rd of May. Look at the outgoing transfer on the 5th of May. $50,000 went to a luxury car dealership in Columbus to secure a 2-year lease on a Porsche 911. The other $50,000 went to a catering company. You did not buy commercial real estate, Arthur. You bought the crab cakes we are eating right now. Arthur's face went completely pale. He looked at Jason, pure murder in his eyes. I pulled a second binder from my briefcase and handed it to another investor, a local doctor who had bought into Jason's lies. Tab 6, I told the doctor. You will find the records for a shell company called Blue Sky Holdings. It has no employees. It has no physical address. It exists solely to funnel your money into the groom's personal checking account. I turned my attention to Jason. The triumphant gleam in his eye was gone, replaced by the hollow, empty stare of a man falling out of an airplane without a parachute. I did not hack your accounts, Jason, I said. My tone is cold and detached as a winter wind. You left a paper trail a mile wide. You forged our parents' signatures to illegally mortgage their home for $300,000. You liquidated our father's retirement fund. They are completely bankrupt. A collective gasp went through the crowd. My mother stopped crying. She stood frozen, staring at me, the words slowly sinking into her brain. No, Patricia whispered, her hands shaking. No, Jason is a millionaire. He bought us that cruise last year. He bought you a cruise with stolen money, Patricia? I said, using her first name to sever the final tie. The bank is going to foreclose on your house by the end of the month. Nicole let go of Jason's arm as if he were suddenly radioactive. She backed away, her hands covering her mouth, shaking her head in denial. Jason opened his mouth, trying to formulate one last lie, one last excuse. But he never got the chance to speak. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the country club ballroom swung open with a violent crash. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway were 6 men and 2 women in dark windbreakers. Printed in bold, yellow letters across the backs of the jackets were 3 distinct acronyms: FBI and IRSCI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation. The room instantly descended into the kind of silence you only hear in a graveyard. The music was gone. The screaming was gone. Even the quiet murmurs of the wealthy guests evaporated. The authority radiating from the federal agents sucked the air right out of the room. The lead agent, a tall man with graying temples and a face carved out of granite, stepped forward. He did not look impressed by the crystal chandeliers or the expensive flower arrangements. He scanned the crowd, holding up a piece of paper. Jason Robert, the agent called out, his voice echoing in the massive space. It was not a question. It was a command. The crowd instantly parted, stepping away from Jason and Nicole like water receding from a shore. Jason was left standing entirely alone in the center of the dance floor. His custom Italian tuxedo suddenly looked ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up in a burning house. I am Jason, he whispered. 2 agents moved with terrifying speed and precision. They did not read him his rights from across the room. They marched straight up to him. One agent grabbed Jason's left arm, twisting it sharply behind his back. The other grabbed his right. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting closed around Jason's wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable accountability. Jason Robert, you are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and international tax evasion, the lead agent said, his voice flat and professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Wait, please," Jason cried out, his knees buckling. The agents held him up effortlessly. "It is a mistake. My brother, he set me up. You have to listen to me." The federal agent did not even blink. "Save it for the judge, son. Let's go." As they marched Jason toward the exit, Nicole finally snapped. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a freight train. She lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of the lead agent. "I did not know." Nicole screamed hysterically, tears ruining her perfect makeup. "I swear to God, I did not know anything about the money. I am just his fiancée. I am innocent." The agent looked at her, entirely unimpressed. "Ma'am, step back. We have warrants to seize all assets purchased with illicit funds. That includes the ring on your finger and the dress you are wearing. You will be receiving a subpoena for questioning on Monday." Nicole backed away in horror. She stumbled over the train of her $1 million dress, knocking into a cocktail table. A half-empty champagne glass tipped over, spilling sticky, sweet alcohol all over the ivory silk of her skirt. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. My mother was still standing near the head table, staring blankly at the doors where her golden boy had just been dragged out in chains. Her entire reality had just been dismantled in less than 20 minutes. I picked up my briefcase. I had seen exactly what I came to see. The math was balanced. The audit was complete. I walked out of the ballroom, past the federal agents securing the perimeter, and stepped out into the cool, crisp evening air. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely public. The next morning, the local news stations were running the story at the top of every hour. The headline was plastered across the front page of the city paper: "Country Club Wedding Crashed by Federal Agents in Multi-million-dollar Ponzi Scheme Bust." There were photos of Jason being shoved into the back of an unmarked federal vehicle, still wearing his tuxedo. There were quotes from anonymous guests detailing the chaos. Jason was denied bail. The federal prosecutor argued successfully that his offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands made him an extreme flight risk. The golden child, who had spent his entire life being shielded from the consequences of his actions, was now sitting in a concrete holding cell in a federal detention center, wearing an orange jumpsuit. The evidence I had compiled was airtight. The federal prosecutors barely had to do any work. I had handed them a fully assembled jigsaw puzzle. Jason was facing up to 15 years in federal prison. There would be no plea deals that allowed him to walk away. The government wanted to make an example out of him. Nicole's life burned to the ground alongside his. She immediately hired a lawyer and publicly annulled the marriage, claiming she was a victim of his deception. But the court of public opinion was not as forgiving as a judge. The federal investigators froze all of her bank accounts, suspecting she had knowingly consumed the stolen money. They repossessed the designer bags, the jewelry, and the luxury car Jason had given her. She lost her marketing business within a week. No client wants their brand associated with a woman who was nearly indicted as an accessory to federal fraud. She was forced to move out of the upscale townhouse they had shared and relocate to a cheap apartment across town. The last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental clinic, completely ostracized from the social circles she had sacrificed her integrity to join. She had wanted a life of luxury without doing the work. In the end, she got exactly what she deserved. Nothing. The town ate the scandal alive. In affluent suburban communities, reputation is the only currency that truly matters. Jason was no longer the visionary entrepreneur. He was a cautionary tale. And because my family had spent years bragging about him, shoving his fake success in everyone's faces, the backlash was merciless. People love a tragedy, especially when it happens to people who acted like they were better than everyone else. I watched it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of my office. My partners at the accounting firm commended my investigative work, entirely unaware that the subject of my audit was my own brother. To them, it was just a brilliant piece of forensic analysis. To me, it was the final, necessary surgery to remove a malignant tumor from my life. For my parents, the reality of the situation did not set in immediately. Denial is a powerful drug, and they had been addicted to it for decades. My father survived the heart attack. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering. During that time, my mother tried to maintain the illusion. She told the nurses that Jason was just dealing with a corporate misunderstanding. She refused to look at the bank statements the federal investigators sent over. But gravity always wins in the end. A month after the wedding, the bank officially moved to foreclose on their home. The $300,000 mortgage Jason had fraudulently taken out had not been paid in 6 months. Without my father's retirement fund, which was completely drained, they had absolutely no capital to save the house. They were given 30 days to vacate the property they had lived in for 32 years. The social isolation was even worse than the financial ruin. The people they had impressed at the country club, the same people whose money Jason had stolen, turned on them with vicious speed. Arthur and the other investors filed civil suits against my parents' estate, assuming they had been in on the scam. Even though my parents were eventually cleared of criminal wrongdoing, their reputation was permanently destroyed. They were asked not to return to their church. The women my mother used to gossip with now crossed the street to avoid her at the grocery store. They were pariahs. They had sacrificed their moral compass, their financial security, and their oldest son to protect an illusion, and now the illusion was gone, leaving them standing in the ashes of their own choices. They had to sell off their furniture, my mother's jewelry, and their cars just to afford the deposit on a small, run-down rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. They were in their late 60s, completely broke, socially exiled, and their beloved golden boy was locked in a federal cage. They had nothing left, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. 2 months after the collapse, the receptionist at my firm buzzed my office phone. "David, I am so sorry to interrupt," she said, sounding deeply uncomfortable. "There are 2 older people in the lobby. They say they are your parents. They are demanding to see you, and they will not leave." I stopped typing. I looked at the spreadsheet on my monitor for a long moment. Then I adjusted my tie. "Send them in," I said. The door opened. Robert and Patricia walked in. They looked 10 years older than the last time I saw them at the wedding. My father was leaning heavily on a cane, his clothes hanging loosely on his diminished frame. My mother was completely devoid of her usual makeup and jewelry. She looked small, tired, and desperate. They stood awkwardly in front of my heavy oak desk. I did not stand up. I did not offer them a chair. "David," my father started, his voice trembling slightly. He looked around the pristine, expensive office. You are doing well." "I am working, Robert. What do you want?" I asked, my voice completely flat. My mother stepped forward, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "David, please. We have lost everything. The bank took the house. Your father's medicine is so expensive, and we cannot afford the rent at the new place. We know you have money saved. We know you are successful. We are your family. We need your help." It was incredible. After everything they had done, after sacrificing my college fund, blaming me for being cheated on, and cursing me out at the wedding, they still believed the old rules applied. They still believed I existed solely to be their financial shock absorber. I looked at them. I felt absolutely no pity. "Let me explain this in terms you can understand," I said, leaning forward and folding my hands on the desk. "You chose your investment. You invested every ounce of your love, your loyalty, and your money into Jason. You bet your entire life on a bad asset." "David, he is your brother," my mother cried out. "He is a federal inmate," I corrected her sharply. "And I am a forensic accountant. Mathematically speaking, you are bankrupt in every possible way. You have 0 equity. You have 0 credit. And you have 0 standing in this office." My father looked at the floor, tears silently rolling down his cheeks. He finally understood. The scapegoat was gone. The bank was closed permanently. "Do not ever come here again," I said, reaching for my phone. If you do, I will have security escort you out for trespassing. Goodbye, Robert. Goodbye, Patricia. I pressed the button to call the lobby security. My parents turned around and slowly walked out of the office. It was the last time I ever saw them. It is a strange thing, cutting off your family. Society tells you that blood is thicker than water, that you have to forgive, that you have to endure. People who say those things usually have not survived the kind of parasites that drain the life out of you while smiling in your face. It has been a year since the wedding. I am sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the city skyline. The night air is cool and quiet. I hold a glass of expensive bourbon, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. I did not go to Jason's sentencing. I read in the paper that he received 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. I felt nothing when I read it. No triumph, no sadness. Just the quiet satisfaction of an equation finally balancing out to zero. I heard through the grapevine that my parents are barely scraping by, relying on government assistance. They never reached out again after I kicked them out of my office. They finally learned the boundary. My life now is incredibly peaceful. I do not have to look over my shoulder. I do not have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable. I do not have to clean up anyone else's messes. I wake up, I go to work, I build my wealth, and I sleep perfectly soundly at night. Some people might call me cold. They might say my revenge was too calculated, too cruel. But I do not see it as revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is angry. What I did was simply an audit. I looked at the facts, I identified the fraud, and I presented the truth to the people who needed to see it. I take a sip of the bourbon. It burns pleasantly on the way down. I look out at the city lights, feeling the absolute, unshakable weight of true freedom. The heavy, rusted chain is gone. The watch is broken, but the time is finally my own. And for the first time in my life, the math is perfectly, undeniably right.